shape, and his mom had a big incident today where they had to go to ER and stuff, so he can't be here tonight, so I'm just filling in. A couple of things. First, I wonder why you're all here. I mean, it's a beautiful night. You ought to be home working in your garden. Down on your knees in the dirt. But I'm glad you're all here anyway. This is, to make sure you're in the right place, this is the Travelers Rest chapter meeting in May. Okay? If you're not here for that, well, we'll welcome you anyway. Okay, I got one more thing to do. That fellow back there behind the camera, he's from MCAT, and MCAT takes and records on video the meetings now, and you can get those on your TV if you got the right channel. And I want to just tell you that I'm going to read something here. The presentation is being recorded by the Missoula Community Access Television, which is part of a media assistance grant donated to Travelers Rest chapter by MCAT. Right? Did I get it right? Okay, right. Anyway, we're glad you're here. And so if you really enjoy this program, and I've seen it, and it's a very good program, you can tell your friends, and if they want to hear tonight, you can turn on their TV. All right. Now, Richie, I know Richie for a long time. Yeah. Richie's a really dedicated interpreter, volunteer, deeply into the park. And his wife has some horses, and I don't get along well with horses, and she and I go around about horses. But anyway, Bruce knows a lot about horses. He knows a lot about Lewis and Clark. So you're in for a good treat tonight. This is a great program. I've seen it once. So I'm going to introduce Bruce Mihelish.
Can you hear me okay? Is this? Can't hear me down here, can you? Okay. Just wanted to know how far down I could go. Welcome. Thanks. Quite a crew for a May crew. I thought maybe you'd be all outside playing baseball or something. So anyway, welcome. Before we start, I'd like to get the record straight, however. I'm no scholar. I'm like lots of you, I'm an amateur. I'm an armchair scholar. I do know Lewis and Clark. I do know horses. Been kind of working on this for the last 35 years, give or take a few years. And I've been absorbing Lewis and Clark knowledge since childhood. I grew up in Helena, and it was kind of weird. I went to the museum on summer vacation and stared at all the exhibits. And I listened to people. I took classes from Harry Fritz, from Gary Moulton. I spent quite a bit of time with Clay Jenkinson, who's out there in North Dakota. There's a guy in the audience tonight that's kind of intimidating that he's here. His name's Hal Stearns. I've heard him multiple times. Thanks for coming, Hal. Don't tell him I don't know what I'm talking about. Joe Musselman, who's just passed and was a great Lewis and Clark scholar. Stephen Ambrose, who's gone now, but still spend time with his daughter Stephanie listening. So picked up a lot of knowledge from those folks. But the people I gained the most knowledge from, some of them are right here in this room. They're volunteers over at Travelers Rest State Park. And I think I probably picked up more from 3 or 4 folks over there than I have anybody. And I'm talking about Tom Schnartz. I'm talking about Norm Jacobson. I know Norm's in here somewhere. There he is. And Jack Puckett. Jack, can you hear me? There's another fellow that's not here tonight, Del DeFore. But there's one person that really stands out, and he's not here tonight. He had an emergency. He's really a notch above all the rest of us. Name's Richie Doyle. And if there's anybody that's taught me a lot about Lewis and Clark and the history that goes with it, it's Richie. He's a local treasure and he's a national expert. So I just like to extend my well wishes to Richie and his family. You know, he's not here tonight, but he's one of my Lewis and Clark heroes. So tonight our focus is ponies and passes, and it's this trip over the mountains. It's this unique part where they're on horses and not in boats or canoes. And this is truly a Montana story, because they go through the mountains from Horse Prairie down by Dillon. They get a little clip of Idaho over to Weehite Prairie. So this is all about us, where we live. And I think that's why it's so important we know this story, is it's where we are at. People in Helena or Great Falls can't talk about ponies, really. They had boats over there. We had ponies over here. So it's a whole different logistic, it's a whole different kind of trip, and I think that's why it's important we talk about it. I've ground-proofed or driven every step of that way from Horse Prairie to Weehite Prairie. I've even climbed up on Windover Ridge, straight up Windover Ridge, much to the chagrin of my wife, who was with me. If you ever walked Windover Ridge, you don't want to do it twice on the same day. But again, it all happened here. So here we are, and let's get started with ponies and passes. Now, this is a review for some of us. For some of you, it might be new, but we're going to set ourselves at 1802. And this is really President Jefferson is our third president, 15 states now. We're the United States. And that's kind of how North America looks at the time. The blue part, that's the United States. That's the new country. But we're in a space race. We're in a space race no different than we were in 1960 with the Russians, except we're in a space race for North America, and it's with Britain and Spain. Those are the main players. They've been here a couple hundred years. The United States is new to the game. So they're a bit behind. And even Russia's up there kind of trying to trickle down into North America. So Jefferson has this vision, and he truly was a visionary president. His vision was, if we could put all this continent under one United States, maybe we could avoid all those wars that they have over in Europe. You see, Jefferson had been to Europe. He'd been to France, and he'd seen all the wars going on over there in Europe. So his vision was to occupy this entire continent. And Canada and Mexico were part of that vision. Now, it didn't turn out that way, but if Jefferson could have had his way, I think he would have certainly taken hold of that. That's my opinion. Now, France, they're kind of a reluctant player in this whole space race. Napoleon is over in the old world using most of his resources and money to conquer Europe. And he's obtained this big chunk of North America from Spain, doesn't quite know what to do with it. And Jefferson sees that as an opportunity. So Jefferson hires two of his best diplomats, James Monroe, future president, and Robert Livingston, and he sends them over to talk to Napoleon's people. Now, Napoleon needs money to engage in war, and he's also been just kicked out of Haiti. The Haitian revolutionaries kicked him out and kicked his troops out. Malaria got him, whatever, but he was losing interest in the U.S. fast, or the North America fast. And Jefferson's goal was to really, if we could, just get that port of New Orleans. See, we've got two new states, Kentucky and Tennessee right there, and they want to get their trade goods down that Mississippi River to the port of New Orleans and over to the East Coast instead of overland. So the goal is to get that port of New Orleans secured, but Napoleon surprises them and says it's an all or none deal, fellas. You got to take the whole shebang, so that whole green territory, Louisiana, goes up for sale. And they negotiate a deal, and it's the deal of the century. For about $15 million, 4 cents an acre, they gain 828,000 square miles and at least double the size of the U.S. territories. That's a pretty big chunk. By the way, kind of an interesting thing there, that's one of the first time that a treaty was signed for the acquisition of land in lieu of war. So we're actually making a deal. And the United States actually went to foreign banks in Europe and borrowed that money to pay it off. That's where Napoleon got the money. So Jefferson's got a challenge ahead of him. There's two parties back then too, and I'm not sure they got along any better than they do today. There was the Federalists. Now, Jefferson was a Democratic Republican, whatever that means. I don't know what that means today, but that was the name of his party. And I'd say they were the more progressive party, the more liberal group. And then you had the Federalists that were very conservative, led by John Adams. So Jefferson and Adams were always kind of at odds at one another. So Jefferson's got to sell this to the Congress and get some of those votes from the Federalists. So he's selling this land acquisition for the purpose of a Congress or commerce. And you know, we've got fur trading potential here. Furs are in demand, high demand in Europe. There's lots of Native Americans out there to trade with. And interesting, the horse trade in the southern part of the Louisiana Purchase is for real. In the 1790s, a guy by the name of Nolan was bringing in horses, sometimes hundreds, and one time 1,500 horses at a time, and selling them anywhere from $50 to $150 a piece. So you're talking real money. That's commerce. And of course, he puts a little spin on it for the advancement of science. That's another reason we need to get out there, because there could be woolly mammoths, there could be saber-toothed tigers, there could be giant sloths. We know there's volcanoes out there. The sea captains have seen them from the Pacific. And of course, there's that lost tribe of Welshmen that we know that are out there somewhere. So he's getting the curiosity aroused to raise the money for the expedition. And the third thing he does to sell this is, listen, if we get this thing mapped and we get our people out there, that's 9/10 of the law. We'll have possession. And really, you can see Britain here and Spain there. They've been slow to the party here. They've been working on other spots. So if we can get this thing mapped, that secures this Oregon territory that's up for grabs for perhaps the United States. And that would really put us in the lead in the space race. So anyway, the greatest American adventure begins. Find the most direct, practicable. I love that word, practicable. Say that really fast. Practicable. It's hard. Map and take observations, which they did a wonderful job of. Make yourself acquainted with the people. Get to know the Indian tribes. And tell them that they need to get along with each other, whatever you do. Of course, that went over good in some cases. And then take notes: soils, animals, remains of extincts. These are Jefferson's words, not mine. Minerals, volcanic appearances, and climate. Well, they didn't find any giant sloths, and they didn't find any woolly mammoths, but they did find some interesting new species. The pronghorn antelope, the swift fox, the prairie wolf, we now call them coyotes. They knew bison were out here. They just didn't realize there were hundreds of thousands of them. Hundreds of thousands of them. Bird species, I put these guys up because that's Lewis's woodpecker on the left, the one with the red. That's Clark's nutcracker, so there's a Lewis and Clark bird there. The good old prairie dog that got shipped back to Jefferson alive, that was new. The mule deer was new. We take mule deer for granted nowadays, but that was a new species. And of course, the star of the show is that mighty bear, the Grizz, that they talked about back at Fort Mandan and they ran into soon thereafter. And Lewis had a hand in naming the grizzly or the grizzled bear. So here we are in Pittsburgh, and this is a naval expedition. The hope is that we could take this thing coast to coast. We know the Missouri River goes all the way to the mountains. We know the Columbia comes up somewhere, so at the very least, maybe we have to go over a little hill and jump back on the Columbia, but we're really thinking this is a naval expedition all the way. Lewis is so sure of it, he buys a dog and he names it Seaman. He doesn't name it infantryman or cavalryman or artilleryman. He names it Seaman because this is a naval expedition. So Lewis shoves off on the Ohio River, Pittsburgh, August 1803. What happens to rivers in August? What happens to rivers in May? We know that now. Okay, well, he should have gone in May because in August he kept getting stuck on the Ohio River. What's the first thing he turns to for help? Horses. First he starts by renting horses, and then he begins acquiring horses. Goes all the way down the Ohio. And then when they camp over that winter and they start up the Missouri, again, horses are there all the way up. That's something I don't know if people understand. This naval expedition with the keel boat and all, but there was hunters and horses along the river all the way up to Fort Mandan. What did they do mainly? Well, they brought in game for food every night. So they provided meals for the men. And there was, I don't know, what's the number? A little over 40 men going up the Missouri at that time. I'm going to pick on you for numbers. You're one of those guys. So we're wintering at Fort Mandan. That's a major hub. It's a major trade center. Friendly people. They give them lots of intelligence and information. And they also have plenty of horses up there. And they build their stockade for the winter, probably used horses to do that. They went out buffalo hunting, used horses to do that. Plenty of horses. And I keep saying that because something really strange happened. They get this intelligence from the Mandan chiefs that, hey, I'm not sure this river passage is going to be there for you. There's just nothing that we know of. In fact, there's this big falls down the way here. And I'm not sure you want to take your boats over that either. So they're getting this intelligence, and so they do something fairly smart. They hire Charbonneau, and this is North Dakota, so I'm going to call her Sacagawea. When she's in Idaho, I'm going to call her Sacagawea. But she's Sacagawea out here, and they're kind of an insurance policy. They know Shoshones have horses. She's Shoshone. He knows French. He could be valuable as an interpreter. So they hire them on, and those two might be a good strategy for horses. Good thinking, Lewis. Valuable assistance. Well, we all know Sacagawea, or Sacagawea, is one of the heroines of the expedition, right? And if you talk to my friend Tom Schinartz, he might tell you that she's just been a little bit overrated. There's some things that have been written about her that aren't entirely true. But she certainly was a huge help. We can't deny that. At the same time, her husband, Charbonneau, kind of has a bad rap. And maybe he is overrated on the bad end of things. He did help interpret. He did help in a few different examples I could share with you later. But it's funny, I just don't think Lewis liked him at all. If you ever paid attention to the trip, Sacagawea and Charbonneau were almost always with Clark. Clark seemed to be able to tolerate Charbonneau. Lewis didn't want anything to do with him. In fact, Lewis is the one that says he's a man of no particular merit. So up the river they go. They leave Fort Mandan, they're crossing the High Line, northern Montana here, and no ponies and no people. Charlie Russell, I think he said the Indians discovering Lewis and Clark is the name of this mural, but they didn't see anybody. They saw signs, they saw old abandoned villages, but they could not find any ponies or any people. And you look at where they went right here through the Assiniboine and Sioux country, Crow country, Gros Ventre country, Blackfeet country, and there's even some Chippewa and Cree up in here too. So you just wonder why they couldn't find anybody to talk to about horses. So they proceeded on, they kept moving. Why no horses? Well, that's the million-dollar question. I don't have an answer for that. I think you got to question Lewis's judgment here. They've had horses ever since Pittsburgh, down the Ohio, up the Mississippi, up the Missouri. Well, why in the heck now no horses? This is the most unknown territory that they've ever encountered. They knew the trip up to Fort Mandan to some degree, but now they're out in the middle of nowhere and no horses. So you just got to question the judgment there. I kind of think that Lewis was on the way up the Missouri before Fort Mandan. They were encountering tribes almost weekly. So I just think he thought, well, heck, we're going to run into plenty of people along the way. We'll find some horses here. But he didn't bring any from Fort Mandan. And then they get to this portage called the Great Falls after they got past the decision of the Marias, and they had to pull those big, heavy canoes across 18 miles of cactus flats near the Great Falls. And this guy here is going, why the hell didn't Meriwether bring some horses? He's pulling prickly pear out of his feet. That really held him up a month. Didn't help the expedition's timing any. And then you get down to the Three Forks, you get into the Jefferson River, and we're running out of river. We're running out of our highway. I mean, this is getting a little bit desperate now. And Lewis takes off with Shields and Drouillard and and McNeil, and he heads out. He goes ahead 40, 50 miles and leaves Clark and the rest of the gang back at the Beaverhead. And they continue to struggle up the Jefferson River. And then finally, at a place near Horse Prairie, down today's Grant, Montana, I think some of you might know where Grant is. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But they finally see somebody. They see their first person and first horse in over 1,000 miles. And they scared him off. They approached the man with guns. They probably approached him pretty quickly in his excitement. Most of you know this story. But Lewis says, I felt sorely chagrined at the conduct of the men. He's blaming it all on his guys, particularly Shields, to whom I principally attributed this failure in obtaining an introduction to the natives. Well, this guy's all by himself. These guys are carrying guns. He's never seen them before. They look different. I don't know if there was anything that they could have done to keep this guy around. But they kept moving. They proceeded on, and they got up to the top of the Continental Divide, a place that they called Portage Pass. We call it Lemhi today. And they had a small celebration. McNeil stood to bestride the mighty endless Missouri River. But then Lewis looks out and sees snow in the mountains. The days are getting shorter. They're beginning to starve. All right, the game is rare now. There's not as many deer. And so they're not only hungry, they're cold, and the days are getting shorter. If there's one time that I think Lewis is really worried that, gosh, they may not make it, it'd be right here on this day. But, as they always do, they proceed on. And they head off the Continental Divide into today's Idaho, into the Columbia drainage, and they find some women picking berries, and the women drop to their knees and think they're in for their doom. Lewis picks them up and smears some red vermilion on their faces and gives them some trinkets and some gifts. And there was a man that was with him. He ran off, and he went and got the braves. And I don't know, within an hour or so, 60 warriors came running up, and there's Lewis and his 3 men to greet him. And Lewis has got to be just exulting here. He's got to be hugely pleased with what he sees, because he sees those horses for the first time. Okay, so after he gets the national hug from all these fellas, he meets Cameawait, the chief, and that night he sees 400 Shoshone horses up on the ridge. This would be in the Lemhi Valley in Idaho, down at the bottom of the valley. And he says, indeed, many of them would figure on the south side of the James River, the land of fine horses. So he's kind of seeing sugar plums and fairies here. He sees these beautiful horses up on the ridge, and he knows he probably has made it. Those are those beautiful horses that make a fine sight on the James River. It's called the Spanish Barb, the Mustang. And they're not hugely attractive, and they're small, they're a pony, they're less than 14 hands. I'm going to refer to hands a little bit tonight. A hand is 4 fingers, 4 inches. So if you're 12 hands times 4, that's 48 inches, right? Okay, so these horses were probably less than 14 hands high. Most horses today that you'll see, like a quarter horse out in the fields, they're 15, 16 hands high. I think we own a horse that's 17 hands high. So they all vary, obviously, just like people. But these guys are short. Lewis estimates that he's going to need a dozen horses to carry about 7,000 pounds over the mountains. When he sees these guys, he changes the number to, I think we're going to need about 1 for each man. That's 33. So he's almost tripled the number he estimates they're going to need to pack their supplies. So these guys have limited carrying capacity, about 200 pounds per horse on a Spanish Barb. A quarter horse or a pack mule would carry twice that much, carry about 400 pounds. Any packers in here? I was going to say, could you verify that? But usually a pack horse can carry 300 to 400 pounds. Make sense, Jack?
Whoa.
Okay. Okay, so the elk dogs, that's what the Indians call them. This is a Shoshone term, bungu. Now I was going to put up the Salish term and the Nez Perce term, but I can't pronounce them, so I just stuck with bungu. I like the Shoshone word. Remember, for 10,000 years, the Native Americans over here had been carrying their supplies with dogs. And these horses had only been here 50 to 100 years. They came over from Spain. We'll talk about that in a minute. So this really revolutionizes way of life for the Native American people. All right, so everybody knows that the horse evolved in North America, right? We're all on the same page there. Some people think that they evolved in Asia. No, they evolved right here in North America 50 million years ago. And this is the guy that started it all, called an Eohippus. Eohippus. He had 4 toes on the ground, and then he had a 5th toe up here. He's no larger than a small to medium-sized dog. So as they evolve, they get taller and taller, and they lose toes until the modern horse has 1 hoof, and there's a toe right up here. So this little thing right there, that's still considered a toe on a modern horse. There's the There's the main hoof, though. Okay, and their teeth changed too. They went from short teeth for eating soft leaves and shrubs to long teeth for eating long grass. So that only took 50 million years. Oop. And there's some variations that evolved in North America. There's the Harrington hippus. This Harrington hippus was a big animal. It was as big as a mule or a Clydesdale. It was a big animal. And there was a North American zebra as well. This is the one I found and just kind of had to laugh at, but it wandered around North America for 45 million years. It's called the horse gorilla. And it has some related. It's extinct now, obviously. Never made it over to the other side of the world like the horse did. But yeah, they went extinct about 781,000 years ago. These are variations that have gone extinct. Some of these, these two here in North America, this one in Mexico, this one in North America. The quagga, which is related to the African zebra, just went extinct about 150 years ago in Africa. And this horse, the tarpon, went extinct a little over 100 years ago in Russia. They're all wild, but all extinct. I get a kick out of this one. Evolutionary cousins of the horse in North America. Scientists know how to do this. They check chromosomes and DNA. But the rhinoceros is a cousin to the horse. And so is the what they call a tapir, which is kind of a pig-like looking creature that roams South America and Indonesia, both those places. But they have chromosomes and DNA similar to a horse. Don't ask me how they figure that out. So we've gone from the Eohippus to the Equus ferus, ferus meaning wild, right? So this is the wild horse. And then the migration begins. You know, when man started coming over here 10, 12,000 years ago during the last ice age, the horses went the opposite way. Probably some of that had to do with hunting because that's all horses were. They weren't used for riding or packing. They were used for food. So most of the horses, well, all of the horses, went extinct in North America, overhunted, climate change, whatever. And the ones that made it came into Asia and came into China, India, North Africa, and there should be another arrow over there to Europe too. They were actually domesticated in Russia. It's funny, the llama got out of here too. They went south. They went to South America. The camel followed the horse into Asia. So North America was the first Serengeti, so to speak, and they all left. Probably because of the influx of man. This is a good representation of how that barren land bridge might have looked during the Ice Age. The oceans were low, lots of ice, and this is how they got across. So this begins this 100-century odyssey around the world. Because they returned, didn't they? They returned back in the late 1490s, 1500. But they were gone for that long. They were domesticated probably in the steppes of Russia. In the steppes of Russia. And you can see that's a great distribution point for horses down to China and India, down to the Middle East, down to North Africa, and over to Europe. It was really a convenient place to start domesticating horses. So they're no longer a food source as much as they are become domesticated. And civilization grows on the backs of horses: food, packing, transportation, hunting, of course, war. Every good, strong civilization has got to have war horses. And of course, we use them for farming and sport as well. Now, they say that man's greatest invention, you usually hear the wheel, right? Or maybe the sail. Well, I'm gonna add a third component to that. I'm gonna add cordage, because a horse just ain't no good without rope. And I can prove that. I've got 3 perfectly trained horses out in the field, but if my wife doesn't go out there with a halter, they're just no good. They just don't do anything for you. So anyway, I'm going to add cordage to one of the greatest inventions man's ever come up with. And all sorts of new technologies come out with the domestication of the horse, the bridle, the bit, the horse collar, the saddle. Look at those spurs. They could do some damage. Look at those are Spanish stirrups. And of course you got to have a corral too. So there was all sorts of innovations on building corrals and wagons, and all sorts of tack equipment comes along with the domestication of the horse. Now we're going to fast forward here quickly and connect the dots for the return to North America. The Moors invade Spain in 711 AD. And they take over Spain for 700 years, and they bring with them those Spanish barb horses. You know, you don't realize how close the Moors were to Spain until you look at this map. But they were, I mean, I think they could probably see each other. So in 700, they even get up into the France area up by Paris. So they're a horse culture, the Moors, and they bring more than Spanish barbs. They bring their Arabians, and they cross their horses up in Spain with a couple of the European breeds, and they come up with the Andalusian and the Lipizzaner. The Lipizzaner is a cousin to the Spanish barb that was here with the Shoshone. Now you think of the Lipizzaner, those are those athletic horses that come out of Vienna, but that's where they started in Spain. And they've got Spanish barb blood in them, just like the Arabian does. And this was kind of like the go-to animal, especially for the military, was the 15th century Spanish barb. They were short, durable, compact, tough, and they used them in the military. So Spain gets their country back from the Moors in the mid-1400s, and if you remember right, Queen Isabella hires Columbus. Well, on Columbus's second expedition over here, guess what he brings? Spanish barb horses. And there's horse ranches established in Cuba and Haiti by the Spanish. So I don't, maybe Spain picked up where the Moors left off as far as being invaders, but they brought tons of horses over in the holds of their ships. Here's a good example of those horses would be in the bottom of those ships in slings for 2 months. For 2 months in the bottom. And then they'd rope them up on deck and throw them in the ocean and make them swim to shore. These guys were tough. And most of them made it to shore. And literally they brought thousands over. So they migrate up into the American Southwest. And there's a major revolt by the Pueblo Indians in 1680. And by the way, this is just prime country for horses. They're multiplying like rabbits. There's now tens of thousands of horses on the plains in Texas and in Oklahoma. But the Pueblo Indians run the Spanish out and steal all their horses. So all these horses become fair game for all these tribes and start migrating north. So that's 1680. The last tribe to get horses was the Assiniboine in approximately 1770. So it took about 80 to 90 years to get all these horses north. And these Indian tribes, these Native Americans, became masters at horse thievery. You remember the story about Clark losing all the horses down on the Yellowstone. The Crow snuck into camp and didn't wake any of the men up, and all of a sudden 25 horses are gone. Then 2 days later, they did the same thing to Pryor in another camp. So they were really good at what they were doing. This is the Spanish barb. I'm not going to go into all this, but they had big lung capacity. One of the things that really sets them apart is their feet are very strong. You don't have horseshoers out here in the Indian camps, so they've got to survive. Their feet have got to hook up. The other thing is they've got a short back. You've seen horses that have long backs. Some of them turn into sway backs. So these guys are just made for the plains and bison hunting. Here's the North African distinction that I think is really interesting. The lumbar vertebrae is right here. On the Spanish barb, there's only 5 of them. On all other breeds, there's 6. So that's what sets the Spanish, biologically, this is what sets the Spanish barb apart. They have 1 less vertebrae in their back. The Arabian kind of has a half a vertebrae, and the Arabian is another North African creature that comes from the same area and evolved the same way the barb does. So they're kind of cousins as well. Now, today we've got all sorts of horses. We've got cold bloods, we've got hot bloods. If you mix a cold blood with a hot blood, you get a warm blood. 300 plus breeds. I can name about 10 or 20 of them, but they're all over. The cold bloods are those big draft horses, like the Clydesdales, and the Arabians, the quarter horses, the thoroughbreds, are the hot bloods. They got a little more hot, a little hot in them. All shapes, sizes, and colors. It seems like every time I see a horse, I learn a new color on them, but there's literally dozens and dozens of colors. And variations in the horse, all sizes. Ponies are under 14 hands again. So the Timor, that's in Indonesia. The Falabella, that's in South America. The Shetland, that's the British Isles. And you got these Dales that are 18 to 20 hands. Belgians, another one. I think the Pinto, or the paint we call them, kind of evolved on this side of the world with the Native Americans. The Tarpon, that's the one I talked about, was extinct. And the Arab's a very popular breed. They're a high endurance, kind of a distance runner animal. So today, this is what we use horses for. Pleasure riding, therapy. Kids love them on therapy. They do police work, and they're just plain fun. I don't think there's anything more fun than watching those Clydesdales go by on a main street clomping, making all that sound. But I'm going to kind of ask you a question here. Is, the horse was man's best friend for 5,000 years. 5,000 years. And all of a sudden we think this little Fido now is man's best friend. And I love dogs. I've got 3 of them. But all the work that the horse did for us for 5,000 years, and we've just pretty much cast him aside because of Henry Ford. And I think if you go back in time in your own family and think about somebody in your family, your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, depended on the horse to make a living. I had a grandfather that came and worked in the smelters in Butte. They didn't haul things around with motors or locomotives. They hauled things around with horses. They were down in the mines, horses. Horses, well, my wife's a ranch girl from the Dearborn Valley. They had horses out every day. And then about 20 years ago, somebody came up with these 3- and 4-wheelers, and I don't know where the horses ended up, but they're way out in the South 40 now. And so they're just not used. But think about which people in your family depended on the horse. I bet you can come up with some. Okay, we're back to Lewis and Clark, and here's the luckiest of reunions that ever happened. Here's Charbonneau, see, he's that bad guy there. He's going, hey, Bill, I think these guys know each other. That's Sacagawea saying hi to some of her old friends. I'm guessing that's Camille Waite there. I don't know how Charlie Russell drew this up, but that was a lucky reunion because now, okay, we're in the money. We can get some horses and we can get out of here. But Lewis is still a reluctant one. I'm going to read this quote. I slept but little, as might be well expected, my mind dwelling on the state of the expedition, which I ever have held in equal estimation with any my own existence, and the fate of which appeared at this moment to depend on the great measure upon the caprice of a few savages. So he's still stressing out about whether or not he's going to get horses, and he's still concerned about the fate of the expedition. But, you know, here's old Sacagawea. She's clearing the way for him. It's going to work out. And here's something I don't think a lot of people think about when they talk about horse trading. What the Shoshone wanted was guns. The Blackfeet are trading with the British up north, and they've driven the Shoshone and the Salish all in the hills, and they expressed great pleasure and said that they had been long anxious to see the white mans that traded guns. We replied that after finally returning to the homes toward the rising sun, white men would come to them with an abundance of guns and every other article necessary for their defense. And the chief says, well, that's a bummer. You don't have any guns now? So Lewis reassures them. So what they're doing is they're trading on promises and credit. And I think that's really interesting how faithful these Native Americans were that they were actually going to bring guns back. Now, Lewis and Clark do give up some equipment, but think about it. This is the most valuable thing that the Shoshone own, and they do it for two knives and an article of clothing. Well, they're waiting for the guns to come back. So, thus I put up the credit card. Lewis was trading on his credit card. So they get these valuable horses. They pull out of that Lemhi Valley. They go up over the top of Lost Trail Pass, and they've got almost 40 horses now. What do? They trash them. They're going over a trail that's not a trail. It's why they call it Lost Trail. There is no trail. The natives don't even use it. This is a trail that tears several of their horses apart, and they almost don't make it. Now they've got a guide with them now that Camille Waite, Sacagawea's brother, provided, Old Toby. And Old Toby tried to talk him into going another way that would have taken him over probably Gibbons Pass. But Lewis was kind of being ornery about things, and he said, no, we're going the fast way. So anyway, they trashed a bunch of horses, and they were a real sorry sight by the time they came off a Lost Trail Pass. And then they get another bailout. Just lucky as heck. The Salish are just pulling up stakes, heading out for a buffalo hunt. But Lewis and Clark and all his men stagger into camp. Salish kind of scratch their heads and wonder what they're going to do with these guys. If you read that book, The Salish People, it's really an interesting perspective. But they really did think about taking them out. But they were so pathetic looking, and they had this woman with a baby, and they had this interesting black man, Big Medicine, York. And some people would say this guy in the front, that biggest dog they'd ever seen in their life, aroused some interest, and let's let these guys through. So they abandoned their tattered horses, not all of them, some of them were in decent shape, and the Salish traded them for several more horses. They got the number back up to about 40 again. They had one mule with them, which Lewis said was his finest acquisition. Now, if you talk to the Salish people or read their book, they're going to say, hey, we didn't trade for these horses. We gave it to them. They were gifts. And I kind of believe that because Clark, even in his journals, he's kind of saying, well, I kind of drove a hard bargain there. He didn't say it in those words, but he kind of thought he was really getting some horses for nothing. Well, of course he was. The Salish were giving him these horses. So here we go. Here's the count at Travelers Rest where we're at today. We've got new Corps members, 39 ponies, 1 mule, 2 colts, and Old Toby. And Old Toby's got his son with him too, by the way. So those are all Shoshone Salish saves. By the way, they're making their pack gear. Oops, sorry. They're making their pack gear out of the oars from the canoes. And I thought that was pretty innovative. This is Clark's map of the Bitterroot. This is where we live. And to get your bearings, this is Sula, Ross's Hole. And right up at the end of the map would be Travelers Rest. Here's Scattered Creek, now called the Burnt Fork. So Stevensville's right here. Florence would be right about here. Corvallis here, Hamilton here. So you kind of get your bearings straight. You can barely read this, but this says Horse Valley. That's what Clark called this, Horse Valley. He's drawn this map. And they saw a lot of horses in this valley, wild horses. They captured a couple, and a couple he said were as wild as elk. But you can see their trail. This is, I don't know if you've ever studied Clark's maps, but there's their trail right along the Bitterroot River there, coming into Travelers Rest to be right about here. By the way, he drew these maps in Fort Clatsop. That's a California condor down there in the bottom. He drew this map probably in Oregon where the condors hung out. And so I don't know, he never did use the eraser to get rid of that. Patrick Gass calls these mountains, the Bitterroots, the most horrible, terrible mountains I ever beheld. And they obviously were coming north looking for the passage. And they finally get here to Travelers Rest. Ancient crossroads, been here for 10,000 years. Lewis names it Travelers Rest because there's a place in South Carolina that he's been to before as a child. And it's a resting place near a mountain pass. So we got a duplicate name with South Carolina. And over the mountains they go, they're cold, they're starving. This is where the horses come in real handy. They ate 5 horses going over the Lolo Trail into Idaho. Killed their first colt near Powell Ranger Station today. So then the third save, the Pierce Noses and Nez Perce. They leave 38 ponies with them, they rebuild canoes, and they jump on the Columbia River. But they brand those horses to identify them because the Nez Perce have hundreds of thousands, maybe thousands of horses, at least hundreds. And they brand those horses and cut their foretops off so when they get back the following spring, they can identify their horses. So off to the Pacific they went. They buried all their pack saddles near the Nez Perce camp, and they were all recoverable the next spring. Went to Fort Clatsop, came up with these great plans to split up when they got back to Travelers Rest, which they did. And on the way back in the spring of 1806, they have to pass this falls that's no longer there anymore. I think I've got the pronunciation right, Sililo Falls. It's right where the Dalles is today. It's buried by a dam. But they were acquiring horses to get around those falls. And I think they acquired 23 horses, and that was from the Chinook tribe, and the Chinook drove a hard bargain. Lewis was pretty upset with the prices they were charging for their horses. They got back to the Nez Perce. The Nez Perce returned 36 of the 38 horses that they left with them. And they said old Toby and the son took the other two. That's up for conjecture, but. And then the snows in the mountains, just like we have today, right now, held them back. They couldn't get across. They tried once, couldn't get across. But that really forced them to spend some time with the Nez Perce. Nez Perce gave them a lot of good information, how to cross the divide. They actually drew maps of Marias Pass, of Lewis and Clark Pass today, Pipestone Pass today. So they showed them how to maneuver around in the Rocky Mountains. And now they're running out of trade goods, so they trade that information with like medicine. They're putting eyewash in the Nez Perce's eyes to help them see better. And it really went well for the Nez Perce. So back over the mountains, the travelers rest we come. They've got 5 Nez Perce guides, June 1806. They stay here, and then they make their famous split right here. 50 horses go south with Clark, 17 horses go north with Lewis. Lewis is going to help use those horses to the Great Falls again, get those canoes around the Great Falls. And but why so many ponies? 67 ponies. Well, remember, they're out of trade goods by now. They've run out. They've traded with all the Indians out on the West Coast, all the way up the Missouri River, and they're just plumb out of stuff. So they're going to use these horses for trade goods. And there's several reasons why. They've got to complete the president's mission. They've got to find the shortest route to the Great Falls. And that seems to be right through these here. Does anybody recognize that? That was before Meriwether Lewis carved his initials in the mountains here. The M and the L. But he had to complete his mission. One was to get chiefs back, Mandan chiefs, any kind of chiefs, to meet the president. So he needs trade goods to convince these folks to come along. And he has these scurrilous Teton Sioux down in South Dakota. He's worried about getting around those folks because they had a heck of a time getting by them on the way up. So they need trade goods. They need money. They need some kind of way to convince these chiefs to come along and get along. So Lewis goes up north. All sorts of things happen. He goes over Lewis and Clark Pass. That's near Rogers Pass today on Highway 200. And drops down into the plains, goes to Great Falls, and of course he gets in the famous Indian fight up on the Two Medicine River near today's Cut Bank. Clark goes south, and it's amazing that he can keep 50 horses together all the way through the Big Hole, all the way through the Beaver Head, all the way to the Three Forks, all the way over Bozeman Pass. And then they get down by Park City, Montana, and they start building canoes. And they must have stayed one day too long because the crows spotted them. And the crows came up and took about half their herd one day. And then he sends Pryor off with the rest, and hopefully he can get up to Fort Mandan to use these horses for trade. And Sergeant Pryor loses all the horses a couple of days later. They sneak into camp. These guys are probably fairly light sleepers. I can't imagine them. I mean, it's like, be quiet, they're taking the horses, but I want to stay alive. I don't know. And this is the trip where Clark carves his initials in Pompey's pillar too. But anyway, it's, this is where they split up. This is a great map that shows, they split up at Travelers Rest. Clark's in red, Lewis is in brown. Ordway takes canoes. He splits up with 10 troops, and he's on the river. And then Clark's here, and then he drops Pryor and 2 or 3 guys off right here. I mean, they're down to 2 or 3 men in a group. It's like, what are you thinking? But somehow, some way they managed. It was a chaotic exit from Montana. Chaotic. Lewis gets shot in the rear end by one of his own men. I found this picture on the internet. I'd never seen it before, but it's probably a pretty good representation. Here's the Crows taking off with the horses. Lewis is on the run from the Blackfeet. He abandons his horses up by the Marias River. So all those horses, all that valuable property is left back in Montana, and they're paddling out on bull boats and canoes. And they're back in the Navy again. They arrive in St. Louis a month and a half later, and they're national icons, national heroes. But you got to think, you got to ask the question, what happens if they just miss the Shoshone by a day or two? They're all heading for a buffalo hunt. How about the Salish? Same deal. What if Sacagawea doesn't run into her brother? Do they trade? I don't know. It's, if we don't win that space race, think about it. We might be Canadian citizens right now. We could be under British rule, or at least have national health care under Canada, I guess. So, yeah, maybe it was dumb luck. Sacagawea hire, good move. Run into Camille, plain lucky. Old Toby helped him a ton. That was a good move. Salish encounter. The timing was incredible because the Salish were just about ready to leave. They could have missed them by a day. Finding more ponies on the trail for food. That number of ponies, I put up 39 and 40. That varies all the time. They lose a horse one day, they gain 2 wild horses 2 days later. It's incredible how the numbers are switching almost on a daily basis. And of course, the snows force them to stick around with the Nez Perce, and they get all that valuable information. Some of you have heard of the Freeman and Custis expedition, I'm sure. Nope. In 1806, President Jefferson does the same thing down in the southern end of Louisiana. He hires Freeman and Custis to go out and explore the southern edge of Louisiana. Now they go all the way up the Red River, which is the northern boundary of Texas, up into the Panhandle. And guess who come and turns them around and sends them home? The Spanish. Spanish stronghold is Santa Fe. And the Spanish were tipped off that they were coming, probably by an American general. We won't talk about him tonight. He's a bad guy. But they came back. Didn't have many notes, didn't have many maps. Never heard of Freeman and Custis, have we? I mean, rarely. There is one book written about them. Dan Flores wrote it, and I read it this winter. It's a good book. But Freeman and Custis are not national icons or national heroes. And of course, here's what happens next. Fur trapping, horse trading in the southern plains, and we're underway with fur companies and Mustangers. So with that, I'm pretty much done. About an hour. Any questions? I didn't see anybody nodding off. Thank you. Question?
I got one. I've asked this question before and I forgot what the answer was. Wouldn't it have been easier for Lewis and Clark to just keep going down the Bitterroot and then down the Park Fork and make their way to the Columbia that way instead of trying to?
Great question. No salmon. No salmon. We've just negotiated the Great Falls a month and a half ago. And there's no salmon in these waterways here, right? First of all, there's intelligence from the Indians that you may not want to go that way because there's falls up there. We don't want to negotiate another set of falls again. Old Toby's standing here, the guide, and he's saying, it's right through that gap, right up here. You were good. So Lewis assesses all that information and decides with the no salmon in this waterway that, in fact, the Salish called Lolo Creek Timsim Clay, which means no salmon. So again, no salmon. Yes, sir.
When you comment on the two votes voting at the Three Forks, the two votes, VOTES.
Okay, are you talking about the votes on the Pacific Ocean when they? No.
Well, I was thinking of the democracy where they permitted the black and women.
Yeah, I thought that happened. Where's my buddy Hal? Did he leave? I think that happened out on the Pacific Ocean near Fort Clatsop. Yeah, and you're right. They allowed both York and Sacagawea. I guess I call her a hyphenated name now, don't I?
Yeah, they're trying to decide where to camp for the winter.
Yeah, so they did include them as votees, yes. They didn't let the horses vote ever, which is discrimination, isn't it? I don't know. Yes, sir.
And then that Nez Pierce have Appaloosas?
I don't know. I don't know that. They have a reputation for that. However, the Appaloosas were developed by another tribe over by Palouse Falls in eastern Washington called the Palouse tribe. So, you know, they could have had a few, I don't know. But it's never mentioned in the journals. My guess is maybe not. I think that came along later. Yes, ma'am.
They came from the San Rafael Mountains in Utah, were traded up.
By the Utes?
Yes,
Thank you.
that's what I had understood. Pretty well confirmed.
I can tell you one thing, the Nez Perce taught Lewis and Clark how to gild a horse better than the white men knew how to. That's one of the things they learned with the Nez Perce is more gentler way to gild a stud. Yes?
You had mentioned that Lewis got horses in exchange for credit for guns later. Do you know if the guns were ever delivered?
Well, kinda. I mean, the fur traders came up and they traded guns, but did a special delivery for Camilla Wake come via UPS from Amazon? No. No, never. You know, it came out back in a roundabout way, not through the U.S. military. Lewis or Clark did not send a package of guns up saying, thanks for the horses. Just didn't happen. Jack?
Tell us about the mule. Did they evolve in this country, or were they already in Europe and they brought them over?
Well, I'm assuming that the Spanish brought mules over, but I've never done any research on that, Jack. Have you? Jack always asks a question because he knows the answer.
I'm sure the Spanish brought some donkeys.
Yeah.
That's what you need, not mules.
Well, yeah, the Spanish had mules. I know that. So I'm assuming this is a Spanish mule. I'm also, you know, there was marks of the King of Spain on the tack equipment with the Shoshone. So there was plenty of Spanish equipment with the Shoshone, and so I'm just going to guess, and I don't have anything to back that up, that this was a Spanish mule. That I mean, they came up through the Paiutes, the Utes, and the Shoshone were about the next tribe up the food chain.
I have heard, and I don't remember where from, that the Spanish had been tipped off that Lewis and Clark were headed out west, and that they sent a party to intercept them, but they never
Absolutely.
made it.
Yeah, well, you know, I always ask the questions, kind of like this gentleman over here asked, well, when they were in southwest Montana, why didn't they just go over today, what today is Monida Pass, go down, jump on the Snake River, and they could have floated to Boise and over to the Columbia? Well, the answer is they didn't want to go south. Anytime somebody sent them south, there was a misinformation by Clark. There's a 650-mile gap between Santa Fe and the Yellowstone River. So they thought they were a lot closer to Santa Fe than they were. And so they just did not want to go south. Now I'm told that there was a Spanish mission sent out of Santa Fe, and they might have gotten as far north as maybe Colorado or Wyoming, I don't know. But they did send out a mission, similar to the Freeman Custis thing, but they never did run into each other. And Lewis knew that, and he stayed away from southern routes. Pardon? Any question? There's.
They have never made it down the salmon.
No, the Indians, Kamehameha told them they couldn't make the salmon, too rough a ride, and they couldn't get their horses over those rocks. Yes.
What was the route like for Alexander Mackenzie when he came west? Were there horses or a river route?
Well, that Mackenzie's your subject. I'm going to let you come back and talk to the group on that. I don't know. I'm a Lewis and Clark guy. I'm not very good on Mackenzie. I'm not.
McKinley stayed north, he was in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah, and Mackenzie was British. We didn't want a British guy down here exploring, like David Thompson was. Any other questions? Well, thanks. You've been a very kind, attentive audience. Thank you very much. You want that?